So, ladies and gentlemen, we move to our next speaker, Ian Gawler. And Ian's going to take us from the outside world that Naomi's been talking about back into the inner space. Ian, as many of you would know, is an author, a prominent advocate of mind-body medicine, and a meditation guide. Actually, he's a legend, really, in his field, based on his own experience of battling and conquering cancer through a combination of diet, meditation, and positive attitude. Ian established the Gawler Cancer Foundation in the early 1980s and has since taught and helped countless people improve their health and well-being and prevent or treat illness. When Ian first started talking about his philosophy, it was pretty revolutionary. But then as the rest of the world began to tune into alternative medicine and recognize the power of meditation, the importance of diet, the adverse effects of stress, there was growing recognition of the importance and value of his practices. I suspect there are many in the audience tonight who share my experience of having known people diagnosed with cancer, but who through adopting Ian's philosophy and approach have had extraordinary success in combating serious illness. It's a delight to have him here tonight on the panel, and I'm personally looking forward to hearing how he's presently reflecting on these very strange times and his advice for cultivating mental resilience. But maybe, Ian, to start us off, give us your peak stress moment for 2020-21. And you're on mute.
Yes.
That's the catch cry of the year, isn't it?
That might be the stress of the year, is it? Thank you for your introduction, Nora. And look, actually, I'm not Jewish. My wife is, and I've got two stepsons who I'm very close to who are. And I must say, I want to thank Naomi, but I found listening to what she was talking about really quite stressful, actually. It ties in, I guess, with a lot of what David was touching on, that our society is becoming more fractured and more polarised. And I think it's really disturbing. I think that it's a huge challenge for all of us throughout the community to find this middle way and to avoid this sort of polarisation and all the conflict that can flow from it. And Label actually asked me to speak about the power of meditation for emotional agility, equanimity, and inner balance.
Just a tiny task, really.
Well, it's actually spot on for what meditation can offer, and it's great to have something that can actually live up to a pretty hyped up marketing promise. But I thought it might be good to start off and ask you all to just do a little imaginary exercise, and perhaps it ties in a little with Dee's image of the lady in the car, but this time imagine that you've got a partner, many of you will, and imagine you've got a car and you manage to persuade your partner to go down to the car. You open up the boot and you manage to persuade them to climb in, and you shut the boot and lock it. And then you get in the car and you drive it round for an hour without explaining to your partner what you're doing, where you're going, or what's happening. And then after an hour of this, you go to the back of the car and open up the boot. And I just want you to imagine what the response is going to be like. Then, as a second option, imagine you've got a dog, maybe a Labrador, and you take the Labrador to the back of the car, stick him in the boot, drive him around for an hour and open up the boot. And if you do that with a Labrador, you're going to get a very pleased, happy, smiling, tail-wagging dog who's saying, "Oh, great, we must be going somewhere really important. You wouldn't stick me in the boot normally. This must be really important. I wonder where we are. We're at the beach, we're going to a park, we've got a ball, I think we get a very different response. So I guess the question is, what's healthy? How do we find some balance in our emotional range? If you think of a Labrador, their emotional range, their emotional agility is really quite narrow. If you think of a happy Labrador, it's got a smiling face and a wagging tail. If you think of a worried Labrador, it's got a smiling face and a wagging tail. If you think of a Labrador that's just had a big meal, it's got a smiling face and a wagging tail. If you think of a hungry Labrador, it's got a smiling face and a wagging tail. Its emotional range is pretty limited, perhaps unlike the Italians. And I don't want to sort of racially characterise anybody, but I think most Italians are pretty happy to admit that their emotional range is pretty wide and reasonably volatile. And I speak to many people who take up practices like mindfulness and meditation, and I think quite a number of them are actually worried that it's going to dumb their emotions down, and they're going to end up like some very leveled out, emotionally dead sort of emotional zombie. And so the question is, what actually are healthy emotions? What do they look like? And how does that relate to our state of mind? So the basic proposition I'd like to put forward tonight is to point out that each one of us, every human being, actually has two aspects to their mind. And many of us are only familiar really with one of those aspects. But in actual fact, these two aspects, it's almost like having two different people living inside of us who are actually got quite different stories and quite different messages to tell us. And so these two aspects of the mind are firstly the active mind, which is to do with our thoughts, both conscious and unconscious, and our emotions. And as Mark rightly pointed out, our biome comes into that as well. But let's just stick with thoughts and emotions to keep it basically simple. And then the still mind is that sort of much quieter, deeper place that's actually beyond the activity of the thoughts and the emotions. So the active mind and the still mind. And the point of this is that if our perspective, if we're coming at life from one or other of these, our experience is going to be quite different, and the way we behave will be quite different. So if we think about the active mind first, with its thoughts and emotions, many people would describe that as our ego. And the point of this is that thoughts and emotions are very active, and they can be very demanding, they can be very calculating, and they can be very reactive. Thoughts and emotions are very prone to being either overreactive or underreactive. Sometimes they can go numb, but they tend to be sort of quite reactive. They can sometimes be hysterical. They can sometimes be quite numb. There's a big range, and our thoughts and emotions are very much affected by our past and its memories. Things like significant events and traumas very much influence our thoughts and our emotions, as do our habits, our beliefs, our hopes and our fears, and our spiritual view. So with our active mind, it's a real mixed bag. And our active mind can range over quite a wide spectrum, from being very self-serving and dangerous to highly altruistic and inspiring. And that can happen in just a few minutes. We can flip along that range quite quickly and change in the way we're approaching or experiencing life, what we're making of the life as we experience it, and also how we're behaving and thinking towards life. So by contrast, the still mind is beyond all that activity. And actually, by its very nature, it's the domain of our own inner wisdom. And it actually happily, really, holds the best of what we aspire to being as human beings. So when we're actually in connection with our still mind, its natural way of functioning is to actually be altruistic, to be compassionate, to be loving, to be grateful, to be generous. All those sort of human qualities that we aspire to come naturally from a connection with this stiller part of our mind. And the point here is that as we become more aware of this inner wisdom, as we seek to hear it more, as we listen to it more, we tend to develop what we can describe as a discriminating awareness. So if we go back to the active mind, if we've got a complex problem and we have to determine what to do with our active mind, and our active mind's heavily beset by our conflicting thoughts and emotions, it's very hard to think clearly and to actually come up with the best solution. And curiously, if we can clear our mind, calm our mind, there's a natural clarity that comes out of that that gives us a really strong sense of what's the best thing to do in any given circumstance. So it's almost like the less our mind does, the more it can actually accomplish. So as we go into this stillness more, it's like we become more naturally inclined to be more compassionate, to be more loving, and to be more altruistic. And at the same time, we become more aware of the games that the active mind plays and how our emotions and our thoughts influence the way we experience the world and how we function. And as we become more aware of this, it can be a bit like, if you can imagine an old person, an old man or an old woman, watching young children in a playground. There's a sort of a wisdom there. They watch them play, and there's a sort of humor about sort of understanding that these are the sort of games that kids play, and this is the sort of things that they do. And there's a generosity of spirit and a sort of a warmth and loving compassion that comes into that. So what to do? How do we get to work on our mind and to have more authentic emotions and a wider range? So actually, it's worth paying attention to both our active mind and our still mind. And when we consider what we can do to help our active mind, we've got psychology, we've got mindfulness, we've got positive thinking. Mark gave us a poem with 50 things we can do. David gave us his top 5, which was a sort of a condensed version and pretty punchy. There's clearly a lot that we can do with our active mind that's going to improve our understanding, improve our capacity, and have lots of benefits and help our relationships and our emotions. And all of that's to the good, but to my mind, it doesn't actually get to the real heart of the matter, which is that if we're interested to access and get to know the still mind better, then that's the domain of meditation. And as opposed to things like relaxation or concentration or mindfulness or imagery or things like that, meditation is this age-old pathway that can take us beyond the activity of our thoughts and our emotions into a more direct experience of this deeper stillness and the natural wisdom and the natural properties that comes out of connecting with that state. So the more we meditate, the easier it becomes to be our natural self, which is to actually be kind and generous, loving and compassionate. And with that comes an authenticity in our emotions. There's just a comfort with emotions. And importantly, there's a strong humour that comes out of that. There's a real sense of humour that comes with this. It's way out the other end of the spectrum from being lifeless or dull or being like an emotional zombie. And so in saying that, I just want to finish up by saying that I think all of us recognise that many people are suffering at the moment for all sorts of reasons, and that's been a human condition for as long as we've known it. Suffering is very real, and so the question is, how do you actually help with this? And for people who are perhaps talking about this natural state of being loving and kind and peaceful and in balance and clear of mind, and haven't had the experience of it, I would really encourage them to consider taking up on a meditation practice, because actually I don't think any amount of words is going to be convincing. Certainly nothing like having some direct experience of this. And really that's what meditation offers. It offers the opportunity to have a direct experience of who we really are. And the more we connect with who we really are, the more we're actually going to fulfill the promise of what it is to be a human being, which is really something quite extraordinary and actually in its full potential an embodiment of love.
Ian, thanks so much for that. And I think so much of what you talk about is exactly what I think Spiritgrow has been trying to do from its very beginning. So it couldn't be better said in a forum like this one tonight. So thank you.